Chapter 17. Every single day, wherever Ken would go, Mustang would always be there, watching him, following him, making inappropriate jokes and passes at him at every opportunity, at school, at his job, and when he was out with other friends. And Ken was losing his patience. "Don't you have anything better to do?" Ken snapped at him one day, dumping heavily on the table the 7th coffee Mustang had ordered. "Are you even drinking these?" Mustang steepled his fingers, resting his chin on the back of his hands and leaning forward with his elbows on the table, giving Ken a mischievous glance. "I'm just minding my own business," Mustang said casually. "Couldn't you mind your own business somewhere other than where I am?" Mustang's smile grew wider as he gazed up at Ken, and he winked at him slyly, but didn't say another word. Ken's cheeks flushed with anger, and he gritted his teeth, turning sharply and storming away to collect the next order. Not only did Ken have to put up with Mustang following him around every single hour of every single day, but at the end of every single day, after school or work had finished, Ken would return home to find Mustang waiting for him. "Welcome home," Mustang would declare happily, throwing his arms out wide. "It's so wonderful to see you." "I saw you 10 minutes ago," Ken replied flatly. "And here you are again," Mustang sighed. "You can't stay away from me." Mustang would often, in this time, give Ken unhelpful advice and make comments that to Ken didn't make sense. "Remember, dweeb, the secret to happiness is learning how to move on. Live your life as you should, not how others want. If anything happened to me, what would you do? Ken, I love you. You know that, don't you?" This continued for several days until Mustang turned physical. One day, Ken was out alone to study in the library, sitting on a comfortable sofa in a quiet corner. He had stayed here for quite some time, absorbed in his studies, when he was interrupted. Ken ignored everyone else around him, focused only on his work. Occasionally, a figure would walk past, but Ken would hardly notice them. One of the figures, sometime later, moved by him then. But instead of walking past, he took a seat beside Ken. Ken glanced up from his book, his expression turning instantly to a glower as he recognized the figure. "Mustang," he said, "what are you doing here?" Mustang turned to him, flashing his teeth in a grin, which only irritated Ken even more. "I'm here for the books." "Liar," Ken shot. "All right, you got me," Mustang grinned. "I'm here for you, actually." Ken gritted his teeth, glaring at his book, which he held tightly in both hands. "This is the quiet section of the library," Mustang observed aloud. "Isn't it?" "Like a library needs a quiet section. I thought the whole of the library was a quiet section." "No," Ken mumbled to his book. "Less people come to this section. This is where they keep rare books, the ones people read less often." "I see. Hardly anyone ever comes to this part of the library," Ken said casually. "Is that right?" Mustang said. "So we won't be disturbed." Ken's heart jolted. He instantly tried to rise, but Mustang stopped him, grabbing him by the arms and sitting on his lap facing him, pinning him down. "Oh, no, you don't," Mustang told him. He smirked again. "You practically ran into my trap. There's no escape now." Ken stared back at Mustang in shock, wide-eyed and heart hammering in his chest. He swallowed at the lump in his throat. Mustang leant forward, resting his forehead against Ken's as he spoke. "Are you going to call for help?" he asked him. "There are people just on the other side of those bookshelves," he sneered. "But then, what would they think if they saw us like this?" "Don't," Ken whispered. "Please." "I've wanted you for ages," Mustang told him. "I can't resist you any longer." Ken squeezed his eyes tight shut as Mustang leant forward, kissing him. He balled his fists, trying to lean away from him, but had nowhere to go. Mustang moved back slightly, looking into Ken's face. He released one of his arms to stroke Ken's face, his fingers coming to his lips. "Open your mouth," he told Ken. When Ken didn't listen, he said, "If you don't, I will have you, right here and now." Ken opened his mouth, breathing in a deep breath. Mustang descended upon him again, kissing him deeply, slipping his tongue inside his mouth, tasting him, savoring him. After several seconds, Mustang drew back suddenly. He got off him, rising to his feet and simply walking away as if nothing had happened. He just left. Ken remained where he was, leaning back on the sofa in shock, cheeks flushed and heart pounding. The book he had been reading lay closed on the sofa beside him. Ken exhaled deeply. For several moments he was unable to move, still shocked at what had just happened. And then he grabbed his book, leaving the library swiftly and running outside to find Mustang. He was within sight of the front steps of the library, sitting on a bench in the park nearby. Ken gritted his teeth, running over to him. Mustang looked up curiously. It was clear from his expression that he had not expected to see Ken again so soon. "What the hell was that?" Ken demanded, throwing his book at his chest. The book bounced off Mustang's chest and onto the floor. Mustang stared at him with a bored expression. "What?" Mustang asked defensively. "You know what," Ken snapped angrily. "Doing that to me. It's practically rape." He bit his tongue suddenly, realizing he was shouting. Several people nearby were glancing his way, casting him strange looks. Ken stared at the ground angrily, cheeks flushed. Mustang watched him for several seconds before rising to his feet. "I don't know what you're making such a fuss about," he told him casually. "You look like you enjoyed it to me." "I did not," Ken said furiously. "There is no way I could." Mustang moved closer to him suddenly, taking the lolly from his mouth. "You tell me you didn't enjoy it," he said, touching his groin. "But your body says different." The touch was only brief, but Ken's pulse instantly quickened then. "You want me," Mustang told him. "You just don't want to admit it yet." He walked past him, slipping the lolly back in his mouth. He turned back to Ken, speaking to him one last time. "I'll see you at home," he said before moving away. Ken glared after him. He could feel his blood pressure inside him swiftly rising. "That arrogant jerk. Who does he think he is? There's no way I want him like that. No way. No way." He turned on his heel and stormed off angrily, quickly picking up the book he had thrown before leaving, heading in the opposite direction to Mustang. "Damn him. Why does he have to toy with me like this? Why can't he just leave me alone? Why does he have to be the way he is?" It was later that day when Ken went back to Mustang's apartment that he found something interesting. "Hey, what's this?" he asked, picking up a framed picture from the side that had been laying face down. The picture was of a young man with short black hair. "Wait," Ken said, staring at it hard, his brow furrowed. Is this you?" Mustang appeared from nowhere, swiping the picture from his hand. "Don't touch my stuff." "Hey, is that a picture of you when you were younger?" Ken laughed. "Yeah," Mustang said defensively, hugging the picture to him. "So?" "Aw, you look so adorable," Ken teased. "What went wrong?" "Hey," Mustang said. "When you're as smoking hot as I am, you don't need to look cute." "Yeah, whatever." Ken waved him away as he headed to another room. "I don't care." Mustang hid the picture after that. "What are you getting so defensive for?" Ken frowned at him. "I don't like that picture," Mustang huffed moodily. "I was different back then. He trailed off, but never finished his sentence. Suddenly, there came a knock at the door, and Mustang and Ken glanced around. "I'll get it," Mustang sang, dancing across the room. He opened the door, seeing standing there a slender young man, dressed in tight leather and wearing heavy makeup. "Not another one," Ken mumbled, quickly losing interest. "It's like he has his own harem." "Phoenix!" Mustang cried, throwing himself into him. "You're here!" "I sure am," the man grinned seductively, hands immediately traveling all over Mustang's body, slipping beneath his belt. "Phoenix?" Ken frowned, feeling a flicker of anger and jealousy as he watched the stranger fondle Mustang. "Is that really your name?" The stranger looked past Mustang then, into the room, and at Ken. "Oh, who's this? Is he your friend or plaything?" "He lives with me," Mustang explained, running his fingers through Phoenix's bright orange and yellow dyed hair. "Phoenix is my stage name," the stranger told Ken in a seductive voice. "So, Mustang," he said to him again, "are you coming out with me?" Mustang hesitated then, still hanging on to Phoenix. He began. "I don't want to leave Ken." Ken grimaced, glaring at Mustang. "Just go," Ken said moodily. "I don't care." "Ken," Mustang uttered. "Just go," Ken repeated, speaking louder now. "I don't want you anyway." Ken stormed away without another word, going to his own room then and slamming the door behind him, standing in the dark and leaning back against the door, breathing heavily. He felt so angry and upset, but didn't know why. Part of the anger he felt was directed at himself. "What's wrong with me?" he whispered. "Why do I feel this way?" He bowed his head, listening to the sounds outside the room. He heard the sound of the front door closing, and then there was complete silence. Ken let out a heavy sigh, straightening up. He opened the door to the bedroom, allowing it to swing fully open. He stood there, staring towards the front door Mustang had left through, feeling suddenly so lonely. "I don't care," he huffed angrily to himself. "I don't need that jerk anyway." He turned sharply away, trying to find something to distract himself. He decided to watch some TV. About an hour or so passed, and Ken was restless, unable to put Mustang from his mind, and feeling ever more angry with himself because of this. Ken turned the TV off, deciding suddenly to go look for him. He ran from the apartment without even bothering to lock it. He knew where Mustang would be. He knew the club he would be hanging out at tonight, and so headed there. It was noisy and crowded outside. It took ages for Ken to get in, but after a long time of waiting impatiently in the line, he managed to get in. Ken pushed through the crowd, searching for him. All the while, the music was playing around them, far too loud. Ken weaved his way around the dancing bodies, making his way forwards towards the stage. When he finally reached it, standing at the front of the crowd, he looked up, seeing Mustang standing over him in the foreground of the stage. He began to sing. Ken listened to his voice. So beautiful, so seductive, and teasing. The others on the stage began to join in with him, as did many in the crowd. As the chorus was sung again, the entire room sang along, jumping up and down. Ken was the only one who did not. That was when Mustang noticed him. He sang, watching Ken as he did so, never breaking eye contact. Ken's heart skipped a beat as Mustang sang. He lowered his microphone, watching Ken, watching him. Mustang wore black leather trousers, low cut. His shirt was open, with only the bottom 2 buttons buttoned up. His eyes and lips were painted with makeup that was exaggerated, and there was glitter smeared around his eyes and cheeks. He reached a hand out to him, inviting Ken up to the stage. Ken's cheeks flushed, and he shook his head furiously as the music beat around them. As the men sang, those upon the stage danced, the lights flashing over them, changing different colors as they moved. Mustang flicked his hair back playfully before speaking into the microphone again, continuing to sing. The crowd cheered as the music continued, singing, as one of the dancers moved closer towards Mustang, caressing him as he sung the next verse. The music heightened. The entire room, save for Ken, danced and cheered and waved their drinks in the air. Some even had turned their attention onto each other. At a glance, Ken saw several couples kissing passionately on the edges of the dance floor and around the bar. As Mustang continued to sing the next verse, the dancer close to him began to kiss him, slipping his hand onto Mustang's trousers, which he seemed to enjoy. Mustang tossed the microphone away, grabbing the dancer, caressing him and kissing him, right there on the stage in front of everyone, causing many to cheer louder. The two then took their positions around the other dancers, dancing with them in unison. Ken watched as Mustang and this other strange man hung off each other, feeling a sudden sharp stab of anger and jealousy. That song ended, but immediately ran into another. As the next song started up, Ken crawled up onto the stage quickly, grabbing Mustang by the sleeve and pulling him away sharply. Surprised by this, Mustang allowed himself to be dragged before grasping Ken by the wrist suddenly and jerking him back. Ken's eyes widened as Mustang pulled him into a kiss, arms wrapped around him. Ken's heart knotted in his chest, horrified that Mustang had done such a thing in front of so many people. He broke away from him. Ken pulled him off the stage and dragging him through the crowd. They stepped out at last into the cool night outside the club. Ken immediately took a deep breath of fresh air, away from the many bodies that had surrounded him. Now he felt free. "Let's go somewhere more private," Mustang suggested, not so casually, moving closer as he did so, still holding Ken by the wrist. Ken leaned away from him as he did this, his heart skipping a beat. He felt suddenly flushed, despite the chilly night's breeze. Mustang pulled him along, moving away from the club. The two ran through the night, heading out of the town, only stopping when they reached a quiet park. Mustang let go of him, the two breathing heavily as they caught their breath, fog appearing in the air before their mouths. Mustang sat on the bench. Reluctantly, Ken followed suit, doing so a short distance from him. Several minutes of silence stretched between them. Ken was the first to break it. "You can sing. You can dance. Everyone loves you," he began, turning to face him. "Is there nothing you cannot do?" "What was that?" Mustang asked him, leaning close with a hand behind his ear as if he struggled to hear him. "What?" Ken asked defensively. Mustang lowered his hand, grinning at him. "You said, 'Everyone loves me.'" He leaned closer to him, speaking seductively in a whisper now. "Does that include you? Did you just admit that you love me?" Ken went red then, eyes widening. No, I didn't say that." "It's all right." Mustang gleamed at him, sitting back again. "I still have time." He threw a glance towards him. "You've got a mark on you, by the way," he said, tapping his own lip as he spoke to Ken. "What?" Ken rubbed the mark, seeing a red smudge on his fingers. "You're wearing lipstick." "Yeah," Mustang smirked. He moved closer to him suddenly. "I will make you say to me, 'I love you, Mustang,'" he told him. "I will, if it's the last thing I do." Ken turned away from him, glaring at his own feet. "Yeah, right," he scoffed. "Like I ever would." Ken felt his mood change within him as he thought of Mustang kissing the other man, and then him. "Why did you kiss me?" he asked his feet. Mustang raised his head. "Answer the question," Ken said to his feet. "Because I love you." Ken's stomach turned over at that. "But how could you say that? You kissed that other guy." "Oh, what?" Mustang said in a tone that Ken did not like at all. Mustang leant towards Ken again. "Are you saying," Mustang began, "that you're jealous?" "No," Ken snapped back, feeling suddenly awkward. "I just don't understand you." Mustang smirked again before leaning back against the bench. Mustang lifted his head, breathing slowly as he experienced the sensations around him. The light from the moon, the cool breeze, the smell of the town, the sounds in the distance of the nightclubs playing their music. "Come on," Mustang said, standing. "We should go home." The moment Mustang closed the front door to the apartment, he turned to Ken. Ken gasped as Mustang pushed him against the door, pressing his own body into his. "What is up with you?" Mustang said absently. "You've been acting really strange lately." "Mustang?" Ken began, unable to keep silent anymore. He blurted it all out, pouring his heart out. "The truth is that I have feelings for you, more than a friend." Mustang watched Ken closely, mouth half open in surprise and brow slightly furrowed. "Do you love me?" he asked Ken, his tone serious. "No," Ken mumbled. "I can't. I don't know you well enough yet, but I want to. Ken drew a deep breath, forcing out the next words. "I want to be your boyfriend," he blurted. "That is," he added quietly, clenching his fists, "if you want me." Mustang moved closer, leaning further into him. "You don't need to be jealous," Mustang whispered into his ear, caressing him, running a hand up his throat, the other down his arm. "I'm not jealous," Ken protested as Mustang nibbled his ear. "Yes, you are." Mustang weaves his fingers with Ken's, pressing his body weight against his further, pinning him against the door. Ken did not resist as Mustang kissed his neck. "I want you," Mustang breathed, "and only you." "Mustang." He leant back, looking Ken in the face. "I will show you," he said. "I will show you that you are the only one for me." "No," Ken said, leaning away from him. "I can't. Not when you've been with so many others. I just can't." Mustang's expression dampened then, and he let go of him. Ken felt strangely lost and lonely as Mustang left him. Ken stayed in the main bedroom after that, sitting at the desk with his school books open before him. The light to the bedroom was switched off. The only light came from the lamp upon the desk, and the hallway light, which shone into the room through the open door. As Ken sat there trying to work, he could hear Mustang running a shower. The muffled sound of his whistling could be heard through the door as he sang happily away. Ken stared down at the book before him, tapping the nib of the pen rhythmically against the table as he thought. He stopped suddenly, huffing and leaning back into his chair. The door to the bathroom opened, and Ken turned as he heard approaching footsteps, seeing Mustang standing in the doorway with a towel around his waist, another smaller towel he had used to dry his hair slung over his shoulder. His breath caught in his throat as he saw him there. The light from the hallway shone brightly, lighting up his features. His red-dyed hair was wet, left to fall loosely about his shoulders. "Hey, have you seen my hairdryer?" Mustang asked him absently. Ken didn't answer as his eyes traveled down Mustang's naked skin. He was so handsome, lean, and muscular. The muscles on his arms, his shoulders, his stomach. "You're so beautiful." Ken blushed then, realizing he had spoken out loud. Mustang, who had been absent-mindedly playing with a strand of his hair, turned to him suddenly, facing him properly. "What did you say?" Ken turned away from him sharply, facing the desk again and leaning over his books. "Nothing," he mumbled, glaring at the page before him. "I didn't say anything." His heartbeat began to quicken as he heard Mustang's footsteps drawing closer to him. Mustang suddenly grabbed his chair, pulling him back and around so that he faced him. Ken stared up, wide-eyed at Mustang as he leant over him. "I heard what you said," Mustang told him. "I heard it loud and clear." His eyes grew gentle as he caressed Ken's face, running his fingers across his jawline. "You want me," Mustang said. "You want to have me. You want to feel me, taste me, feel me inside of you." Ken's stomach flipped, his palms began to sweat, and his breath quickened. Mustang's finger came below his chin, and he tilted Ken's head back. "I will have you," Mustang told him. "I will give myself to you, if you want." His eyes grew hungry. "If you don't want it, then tell me, and I will listen." Ken tried to speak, to say something, but he couldn't. His breath was caught in his throat. Mustang smiled at him, reaching out to him. He grabbed Ken below the chin suddenly, leaning down and kissing him. Ken's nails dug into the wood of the chair as Mustang kissed him, his hands running over Ken's body. He grabbed Ken around the shoulders suddenly, pulling him up from the chair and back across the room. Mustang fell backwards onto the bed, still holding Ken. Ken gasped as he was pulled on top of him, leaning back away from him as Mustang's hand moved down his body and to his waist. He grasped onto Ken's hips, holding him in place as Ken rested upon him. "You want me?" Mustang said to him. "Seduce me." Ken's cheeks flushed at that as Mustang waited expectantly. "What?" "You heard," Mustang demanded. "You want to make love to me? Then seduce me." Ken hesitated, bowing his head slowly. He reached a shaky hand towards Mustang, weaving his fingers through his hair and pushing his red hair back. Ken leant forwards over Mustang, kissing him on the lips, as Mustang, lying back relaxed on the bed, kissed him gently in return. Ken moved his lips down his body, kissing his neck and shoulder. He squeezed Mustang's strong arms, his hands shaking and sweating. Mustang turned his head towards him, watching him closely as Ken hesitated. "I can't do this," Ken mumbled, backing off. I don't know how." Mustang sat up suddenly, grabbing Ken by the shoulder and rolling on top of him, bearing over him. "Then let me teach you," Mustang said, leaning over Ken and unbuttoning his shirt one at a time. "And then you can do the things to me that I'm about to do to you." "How can you be so calm?" "I've had a lot of experience," Mustang whispered seductively, taking his hand and kissing it. "I know what I'm doing." He ran his fingertip along Ken's naked flesh, trailing it down his chest, into his navel, and further. Ken suddenly grabbed his hand to stop him as he began to unzip his trousers. "I already gave you the chance to stop me," Mustang said, pushing his hand away aggressively. "There's no going back now," he said. Ken clutched at the sheets tightly as Mustang began to caress him, touching him in a way he had never been touched before. I've never done this before," Ken said. I've never... "Has a woman never touched you?" Mustang asked in a murmur, moving off him as he pulled Ken's trousers down. "No," Ken whispered. "I mean, not like this." He stared up at the ceiling as Mustang pulled his trousers over his ankles, throwing them off the bed to the floor. "Have you ever slept with a woman?" Mustang said, licking Ken's thigh. "No." "Have you ever kissed a woman?" "Yes." "Tell me," Mustang murmured, holding Ken in his hand, nuzzling into him. "What have you done with a woman?" How many girlfriends have you had?" "Only one. 2. "And," Mustang said, "how far have you gone with them?" Ken thought, kissed them, touched them, but that's it. "I'm glad," Mustang said. "Then I will be your first." Ken drew a sharp intake of breath as Mustang placed his mouth around him. "What are you doing?" Ken gasped. Mustang paused, lifting his head up to Ken. "Pleasuring you," Mustang said, rubbing his hand gently up him, moving his cheek against him. "You want it," he said, placing his hand around him and moving his mouth over the tip. "There's no point in denying. Your body tells me everything." His mouth moved over Ken, sucking him, feeling Ken's touch deep in the back of his throat. Ken threw his head back, moaning, his body trembling as Mustang moved his head vigorously back and forth. "Mustang," he gasped, unable to hold himself. "I'm going to—" "Go." Mustang's muffled voice came from around him. He had paused only briefly to speak before continuing. Ken's breath quickened rapidly as he climaxed. He held his breath for a moment before letting out a deep sigh. Mustang pushed himself up, his red hair falling over his face as he sat up. He swallowed and sighed, lifting his head up and smiling at Ken. He wiped his mouth lightly with the back of his hand as Ken stared back at him. "How did that feel?" Mustang asked him. "It felt," Ken added, "good." Mustang reached towards him, stroking his cheek and running his fingers through his hair. "I'm not finished with you yet," he said. He grabbed Ken roughly by the shoulder and turned him over, holding him by the waist and lifting his rear end up. Ken tensed suddenly, positioned on his hands and knees. "No," Ken gasped. "Don't." "There's no going back now," Mustang told him, reaching his hand around Ken's body and caressing him between the legs. "I've never done this before," Ken said to him. I'm scared to. It's all right," Mustang said, pushing Ken's front end down against the bed. "Just relax." Ken breathed slowly through his mouth, feeling a strange tingling in his chest. His stomach tightened. "You trust me, don't you?" Mustang asked. "Yes," Ken breathed. "Do you love me?" Ken's heart tightened in his chest, and his words were caught in his throat. "It's okay," Mustang told him, moving his hand around. "I still have time. I will make you say it. One day." Ken bowed his head, gritting his teeth. "It's all right," Mustang whispered to him. "I won't hurt you. I'll be gentle." He pushed himself forwards. Ken let out a whimper. Mustang hesitated, pausing for a moment, allowing Ken to relax before pushing all the way in. His rhythm was slow, was gentle, loving. He held Ken with one hand on his waist, the other on his shoulder, as he thrust into him. Ken felt Mustang as he pushed deep inside him, again and again. Ken remained resting on his front, biting into his hand as Mustang had his way with him, taking his pleasure for several minutes. He paused for a moment, speaking to Ken. "Are you all right?" "Yes," Ken whispered back. "I'm going to come soon," he said. "Can I finish inside you?" he asked. "Can you handle it?" A tear ran down Ken's cheek, and he gritted his teeth. "Yes," he whispered again. Mustang's hand ran down his body. He gripped Ken with both hands now around the waist and thrust into him, this time harder. Ken held onto the sheets as his pace quickened. Mustang let out a moan, throwing his head back as he finished. Ken let out a breath as Mustang pulled out. They lay side by side on the bed, breathing heavily. After a while, Mustang spoke. "I hope I didn't hurt you." "No," Ken mumbled. "You're fine." "It felt good," Mustang smiled, "to have you at last. I've wanted this moment for the longest time." "You could have any man you want," Ken told him. "Why did you want me so bad?" "It's because I could have any man I want," Mustang said, "that I wanted you so badly. Because you resisted me." Ken turned his head towards him, lying on his back as he watched Mustang. Mustang smirked at him, leaning over him and kissing him. "I love you, Ken," Mustang said. "You shouldn't say that," Ken mumbled. "Why not? It's true, isn't it? You shouldn't say something so sincere, so quickly." "Why not?" Mustang protested. "None of us know how much time we've got left on this earth. If you died tomorrow, then I'd be glad I told you how I feel before I lost you." "Why are you so serious all of a sudden?" "It's just the truth," Mustang said. "I love you. I have done for a long time." Ken glanced away, but Mustang grabbed his cheek gently, turning Ken's head back towards him. They shared another kiss before relaxing on the bed again. Ken lay there for several minutes beside Mustang in silence. When he next spoke his name, Mustang didn't answer. "He's sleeping," Ken realized as he looked over at Mustang, seeing him lying still with his eyes closed and breathing slowly. He shut his eyes too, and was asleep in minutes, feeling exhausted.